Hey everyone, Cynics here, and it's time for a long overdue episode of Critique Time. So, we have our little whiteboard here, which just once again goes over the submission kind of guidelines for doing stuff. Once again, 1280 by 720, and you put your name on it for reference purposes if you want something critiqued. And I think we'll just keep it on facebook.com/cynicsdesign for sharing stuff. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete this stuff about, putting it in the comments because it's not that important and it kind of makes a mess. So let's just stick to Facebook. And in fact, I think we'll just stick to Facebook for pretty much all of this stuff exclusively, the critique time stuff. We'll probably move Design Lab content to something else like a forum or some other type of format that makes it easier. So the Facebook, that is pretty much just going to be for critiquing art and sharing your art. You can submit art there that's just not for critiquing, but just for like, oh, I saw the video and here's like something that was inspired by the video. So all that type of stuff, we'll put that on Facebook, and so we can all share and comment on it. Don't forget to comment and critique other people's artwork that you see posted on there, because it's a good exercise for yourself to be able to critique stuff. Because remember, being able to critique stuff is pretty much a central part of becoming an artist. Because a lot of art isn't mechanical. A little bit of it is being able to draw the straight line or the circle. But it's also mainly more so than any of this, because even if you can't draw a straight line, you need to be able to recognize that it's not a straight line and then do whatever you can to fix it. So as long as you can identify problems, you can make them better. So critiquing, identify anatomy problems, compositional problems, stuff like that. So critiquing helps not only you, but the person that you're critiquing. I should say that the other way around. Critiquing helps not only the person you're critiquing, but it also helps you to become a better artist. So anyway, I haven't done a good job of keeping these monthly. But anyway, critique time, CNC videos, and one more thing. I think we will start doing some live kind of portfolio review type stuff on like live streaming, Justin TV, Twitch TV, something like that. So I don't really have a way to, communicate with you guys to tell you when it's up, except that I post it on my Twitter. So anytime I'm streaming, I'll post on Twitter that I'm streaming, and maybe you could jump in and share your portfolio or something and get like instant, fun feedback, and we'll talk about art stuff and, just kind of have fun. So I think that's it for the intro. Let's hop in and see what you guys have submitted for this episode of Critique Time. Alright, so first up, I did mention that Critique Time was a good chance for me to answer questions that might be useful for you guys to hear. So this was one that was posted on Facebook, and it's basically asking me how I respond to a critique that I personally disagree with. And, what if I think the person is not qualified to give a critique and things like that. But let me just say something before I get started, and I don't think there's any quite such thing as an unreliable source in terms of talent-wise. I think anyone, even if they're not an artist, can give you a useful critique, and the only time it would be unreliable is if they were purposely lying to both, you and themselves to try to, trick you for some weird purpose. But I don't think I've ever run into anything like that or seen anything like that. So people usually have some reason for not liking something or giving a critique. And do I trust my gut or try to build off what they say? I always try to understand where they're coming from. If someone gives you a critique and you can't understand where it's coming from, that's more of a problem with your skills rather than their skills. You always need to be able to understand why they don't like something or why something looks strange. You might draw a hand and you think it looks fine, but everyone's saying, that hand looks wrong. There's something off about it, and you're like, no, it looks fine. But maybe you're overlooking something. Maybe there's a tangent in the background that's making it look awkward, or something like that. Because tangents are things that usually get overlooked when you are focusing on the art, and what you're looking for in terms of where things are positioned. But when you have fresh eyes on something, that's where you can get a lot of critiques that are possibly disagreeable. Most critiques are useful, I find, and even I would say the ones that don't seem useful are somewhat useful themselves, because at least it helps you understand what people's reaction to your piece is. So I've never strongly disagreed with a critique. I can use an example like the shiny mech thing we did a couple months ago. The shiny mech, I drew like those red designs, like spirals and things on its hands and things, and that was kind of a divisive thing where a lot of people were commenting on that mech in that video that they're like, oh, you kind of ruined it, or I don't like those red things. But I personally like those, so that was one of those times where I'm like, I'm gonna stick with my gut on this, but I have to understand why they don't like them. So I kind of tried them, I messed with them a bit on my own time. And on the print version, which I made for, all the expos and everything, I actually used a slightly different version of the art, which has the red markings in a slightly more subtle way, but it still is strong to me, and I really like what they're doing. So I try to figure out why people like something or why they don't. Sometimes it's a difference of opinion on, what's cool and what's not. And as long as you can understand that that is all it is, then it's fine. But anyway, critiques always good. Don't worry about how reliable or talented a source is. I never like when people, defend a critique by saying, "Well, look at your work. Like it sucks. You can't draw. Why are you telling me how to draw?" But that's a very unhealthy attitude to have. But anyway, let's move on and get some critiques going. So first up, let's see. We got this piece here. Compositionally and stuff like that, right off the bat, your eyes kind of drawn, right to the middle area. Obviously all the composition and characters here, but there's a lot of stuff that feels like it's really around the edge, such as this tree and this little squirrel guy and kind of the river and the way this tree kind of leads you off toward the corner. So there's a lot of like compositional stuff that's kind of weird about the environment itself. But I would say the main factor to think about with this piece is probably the saturation on everything. This green is like really strongly unnaturally saturated, and I know you're going for a slightly cartoony look with the proportions and everything. You can tell it's meant to be more animated, lively, but colors are something that even though you think they should be kind of popping in strong saturations, even if you look at like a Pixar movie or something like that, which seems very vibrant, there's a lot of kind of subtlety in how they're using their saturations, and they're always kind of using them in distances to make things look better, whereas this is pretty much one note top to bottom saturation wise. And if I move this to black and white, it would probably also not read that well, like between the trees and some of the objects like that. So that's just something to think of. I would say the main thing is probably compositional stuff, just watching how your eye gets led around the page. And a lot of people have trouble when I talk about composition. I know I did at first when people used to talk about it, because you don't really understand what it is. You're looking for like a formula. You're like, okay, well, how do I make my composition? Is it like some kind of structure where the triangle goes here and the circle goes here and the square goes here? But generally, composition, anytime that's mentioned, it just refers to how your eye flows on the page. So if you were to just quickly glance at something or look at the thumbnail and you just kind of wobble your head around and blur your eyes, you'll see kind of, like, okay, your eye gets drawn to places like this, but it's also getting drawn to the edges of the page, where what you really want is the eye to be led somewhere back around. So you want to find ways to lead your eye back around and stuff like that. I keep saying and stuff like that. I'm sorry for that. So there's like minor things like tangents. You'll notice here we mentioned tangents before, and that is something like this tree. You see how this tree kind of folds around and it follows this line, so it follows this X thing right back around. So a tangent is like that line just kind of melding with the other one. And if you wanted to break that tangent, you would probably have had to made this sword slightly larger or do something like that. But anyway, I mainly just color things, value things. Also, like the strength of your brush strokes. You can see how they're like just as strong in creating as much composition around the edges of the tree. Where if it was, something slightly lighter, even lighter still, it doesn't really have to mean that the brush stroke or the brush opacity is lighter. Just the color you're using is lighter, and that kind of softens up the edges of things. So, I think that's about it for that one. Let's just move on, see what else we can find. Here is a photo reference painting. Those are always fun because it makes it easy to critique stuff for me. But this is like where they are when you're kind of like getting used to photo rep paintings. And the main problem is you're not pushing your contrasts and your darknesses enough. Everything is kind of in this gray kind of middle area, maybe like 30% to 60%. Whereas you look at the reference itself and everything is just crazy lights and darks. Especially you look in here, these are probably 90% darks. So you really want to push your contrast, and that's really intimidating to do. It's scary because when you do it at first, like when you're starting a piece, you do those strong darks against those lights, and it just looks a little off. It looks a little bad, and it gets you nervous. So you work in minor changes, minor shifts of value. So things are kind of in the mid-tone, then you make them a little darker and a little lighter. But once you get to this stage, maybe this is a good time to say, okay, now I can go back, now that I've kind of made myself more comfortable, and really just push the dark values back in. So you can see, like, this is like practically black. It's near black, this lip up here. And it's like the hair around there, it's, practically black as well. So just kind of once you've established your stuff and you're kind of comfortable, that's when you need to start pushing your values and really get that contrast working for you. So next up, we have this piece by Gen 4. And I would say there's two good things I can talk about here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is kind of an obvious thing that you might be seeing, and that has to do with paneling. So I did a whole video talking about industrial design paneling, and I guess, I don't know, I feel like he didn't follow that video that well, because it mainly talks about using your lines to help show the form of something, or the function of something, or the scale of something. And this kind of feels like the paneling is all over the place. It doesn't make any sense in terms of the form or the function. So yeah, and they're also kind of dark, and it's just kind of, this all feels very flat. There's like little hints of shading here and there, but otherwise, you'd want your shadings to be, obviously this plane is kind of like a cylinder, so you have like a highlight and shadows, and probably a bounced light, on the bottom. Typical cylinder type reflections. But instead, it's just kind of flat, and you put on a lot of panelings and a bright yellowish green color. But the other thing I want to mention is, because I think the paneling stuff, that can be fixed if you just, work at it and start doing more industrial design stuff. But the other thing is that you might not have thought about is the background and how that interacts with your piece. So let's look at your airplane. Looks like all the light is kind of on the front side, and it gets a lot darker on the back side. But the problem is your background also is lightest on this side and darkest on that side. And generally, I know what you're thinking, that, well, the sky's lighter over here, that's why the sun's there and the lights and all that stuff. But actually, this is kind of a cloud, so you might get some shadow over here. But you want to do whatever you can to kind of break that up. So if you were to make the dark side of the sky over here and the light side over here, it would just make things kind of pop a little more. It would make your design, more readable, more fun. So that's just something to think about when you're doing your gradients in the sky. And I do like that you did a gradient from left to right in the sky. That's always a good thing to do when you're doing your skyboxes. Never just keep them flat in blue, always be gradiating your skies from side to side, top to bottom, anywhere you can. So let's move on. And here is a funny one. I laughed pretty hard when I saw this because obviously it's some weird guy and he's pointing at a camera or something and probably talking about art. Um, but there's a couple things that I noticed right off the bat, and I was extremely impressed with your fake whiteboard because I have this whiteboard behind me that you've seen in the video if you watch the video about cynics. But you did a great job at just capturing the values of that whiteboard. You can see there's even like the little white where it feels like there's reflections going on, and it's all very. It feels like it's kind of bent. And I was really impressed when I saw this. And not only that, you captured this feeling of like the ink on the whiteboard quite well as also. And this is like something that I've always loved in art when there's like some minor little details in the background that you can get lost in. Because you took what I have on my backboard or on my whiteboard and you changed everything. So instead of having it's a sad little face here that says, work harder, it has a happy face and says work happier. And I don't even know what everything says because you probably couldn't read it in the video. So you were just like writing random things. It looks like it says plus or for grape more, I don't know, excited not to. I wish I could read everything that's going on here. See, it's a lot funnier to me because I know what it actually says. Like over here, for example, I was having like some talk about like artist showcase stuff and what I want people to do, like 3D stuff and animation and I forget what else I have up there, traditional stuff. But instead it just says ed and something and jokes and not lisp. So yeah, I am just rambling on because this is highly amusing to me and you guys are like, this is not even a critique. Would you please be quiet and move on? But anyway, I like your colors over here. The weirdest thing is probably the hand, and I would say that's probably the hardest thing anyway. So hands in perspective, especially with a finger just pointing toward the camera. And I would like to point out that I'm pretty sure this wasn't like referenced, exactly. I don't think I ever made that face and pointed to the camera like that. So I guess this is just kind of based on the video, but obviously a loose interpretation. But anyway, the fingers kind of look a little stubby and chubby and strange. But once again, that's a difficult thing to deal with, and you would probably have to start using some tricks in terms of both focus and how you're using your colors to really pop, the front of the finger, in front of the hand, in front of the face and the body, and just kind of move things back into three-dimensional space. So that's just something to think about. But it's a good effort, and I like the color choices because they're kind of subdued and kind of simple. But yeah, once again, hands in perspective, one of those things you'd like to practice a lot. And it's also one of the easiest things to practice, but usually you're doing it from the other angle, where the hand is facing away from you, because that's how you draw it right now. And I'm looking at my hand and making that real fast. But yeah. If you had a mirror, then it would be a great chance to put your little mirror out in front of your hand, and then you could get all those good stuff where it's facing the camera and facing the mirror rather. I call everything the camera, but that's kind of a term just to showcase what you're drawing. The canvas is also the camera. Anyway, let's move on. So we have an environment here. Those are always fun. It's a black and white environment, so that's good because it lets you really focus on using your values to establish three-dimensional space, which we've talked about. And this does a good job of it. You can see how it clearly puts this bridge in front of this kind of foliage and trees in the background. And there's a nice kind of gradient going on here where it gets lighter and then darker as stuff moves closer to camera. And that all works pretty well. Some minor notes I could make. Let's see. You see how this stream here, you kind of have your brushstrokes following the stream like this? Usually you'd probably reflect them. You'd have your stream here, and it would probably be a flat color. And you might, in fact, reflect some lighting stuff. You reflect the environment. There might be the bridge or something. But your lines would probably usually be, kind of across, like you're getting lit by the light in the background or something. That's just kind of how water looks when we look out across it, and it doesn't look like the ripples are kind of that way. We always see the sun reflecting in flat little surfaces that way. Um, yeah, I don't know if any of this is making sense. I feel kind of really stupid anytime I hear myself talking, and I know that it's making a, a bare minimum of sense, and I'm using words very poorly. But that's why I'm an artist and not a writer, because I can only think visually, and I can't think with my words apparently. So that's the downside. That's probably why there aren't that many commentated art videos going around. So anyway, let's move right along. I was having some trouble color variation without it looking weird. So we got this piece by Anarchic Solution. So it's like, and I'm getting easily distracted because there is a crow crowing outside, and it sounds like it's trying to speak English to me, and it's very distracting. It's like a crow that's trying to form words for whatever reason. And this is even more strange because it's almost 2 a.m. in the morning, so I don't know why there's a crow awake and while it's trying to talk to me. But yeah, I will do my best to ignore this crow in the background. So anyway, the shadow here doesn't quite make sense. You can see how you kind of had this lighting source where it's coming down from up in here somewhere, coming across the hand. But you have this part over here that's just kind of coming out like this, when it should probably, the shadow should be coming down, and wherever it's meeting like the meat of the arm, that's where you can start plopping it out somewhere. So I'm having trouble giving a good quick critique of this piece. There's a lot of like little anatomy things that are off. There's thumb's missing a knuckle, or maybe that could be placed out there somewhere. The ear, just kind of ear anatomy is kind of weird, and you got to get used to that. And there's just like general face stuff on how the nose and things are formed. But you're mainly asking about the color, and I think the main problem you might be running into is just having to do with like how you're approaching the darks and the lights in your piece. So you obviously have some kind of strong lighting scheme in mind. And let's see, it should be on the back of the head. So you probably need to bring this whole kind of area more into shadow and less, orangey tones, less kind of warmth in it. But it all gets kind of complicated with the green hair and the green eyebrows and everything. So it gets into this complicated territory of trying to make something that's very anime-ish in color scheme look more realistic, and the whole thing just kind of gets it gets confusing to critique in one way or the another, because if you wanted to make the hair, like this hair, look like it was realistic, there'd be more shading on the front. It wouldn't quite look as green and as vibrant as it does. It might where the sun's hitting it, but like in the shadow parts it probably just look more brownish and whatever, plain. But anyway, I'm sorry I couldn't come up with a more succinct critique for this one. It's kind of confusing to me when it's like a mix of styles and I'm trying to think of what would best help you. So here we have a piece by Victor Costa, and it looks like the main trouble he's having, or at least he's asking about, is that he feels the saturation is a bit too high and fabrics are kind of weird. I don't actually have a problem with the saturation in some of the fabrics. Like, I like this neck fabric. It has a nice reflection. It kind of looks like a goldish foil. I don't know if that's what you were going for exactly. But maybe you're talking about this neck part here is kind of strange. It's hard to say because I don't know what exactly you're going for. It looks highly reflective, but also not, because usually when you have these like white and dark areas, it means it's kind of metallic. But this part probably isn't picking up as much red and stuff as it should. And like this area in here, it could probably be like put in shadow more. And probably more contrast in various places just to kind of punch it up a bit. Yeah, you're kind of right that this kind of just drawing white over here is kind of crap. because it doesn't really help the piece. You need something that's a little more colored in some way. You never just want to bring whites and pure black into the piece, especially just like half and half like this, because it just feels unnatural. It takes away any semblance of reality, because light doesn't look like this when we look around ourselves. We don't just see these kind of white sprinklings of brushstrokes everywhere. So something more subdued, just a bright value over here into a more shadowy value over here. Maybe even a background that's something else entirely. I'm not really sure, but overall, I don't think saturation is your problem. I would keep the strong saturation and just kind of retool things a little bit. Just even get rid of the background. That always shocks me when I forget to select my layer. Probably just like get rid of the background, kind of mess with it a bit. Never use whites or black to kind of establish your lighting. So what else we got? This little mech here by Ben Johan 4. It just kind of runs into some very basic problems with how we do 3D shapes in rendering. And that would be kind of shadow stuff. So let's see. This is obviously like paneling, and it's meant to be like kind of a triangular thing where one side should be getting lighting more so than the other side. So anytime we have something like that, we usually just want to kind of simplify things, and one side will be slightly darker, one side will be slightly lighter, and you go around, you establish things as if it were a 3D shape, and you don't like have these kind of weird kind of smushy shadows going on everywhere. You just keep it simple. So the whole bottom, obviously it's on the bottom of something, so it's shadow, and the top is the top, so it's lighter. So you just kind of keep it simple, and suddenly it looks a bit better and more reasonable. And like this leg back here, there's no reason for it to be so bright, and it's also breaking our basic rules of industrial design ground planes, in that we want to make a line here, and this back leg is going under that line, so that's not right. It should be popping up somewhere back about there. This is as low as it should go. So just minor things like that, stuff to work on. Keep things simple, keep your shapes geometric, keep your shadows basic. Don't worry about kind of blending stuff and doing all this fancy tricky stuff when you could just be doing blocky values here and there. Let's see. Next up is this piece by Dane, and it looks nice. It's like a good basic black and white environment. Once again, you guys have been good with your black and white environments. So let's see if anything stands out. The brushstrokes get a little crazy on this ground plane, but I like how they work with these kind of rocks. I would assume they're like rocks, and this is kind of cavernous because you have these like textured brushstrokes, and those always work well for kind of giving your rocks some quick texturing and interest. But let's think a little bit more about like the story we're telling. So obviously there's a castle here, and there's a path because they want to get to it. So we kind of want to define that path. We want to give our eye something to look at, something to follow. So when we look at our piece, we could see, okay, this is where they're going. We got two little people here, and we could kind of walk them through our composition and walk them through our image, kind of give it a very story feel. So there's like a couple strange little lines of trees here which don't really make much sense, and they don't really have much shading under them, and they just kind of feel too dark and a little bit out of place. So I don't really know what they're doing per se, but you're the storyteller. If you have a good story with what the trees are in this area, I'm sure there's something that you can do. And I would assume that this is kind of like a rocky area, and maybe there's even water out here. I'm not sure. It's probably a little problematic if I can't tell exactly what's going on. Overall, though, I like the composition. I like how everything's kind of leading you in and around, and you got the figures here to give everything scale and scope. And the other things, just might be if you have a way, to bring in the rocks slightly closer, in the corners, just so there's even a little more vignetting and darknessing around the corners. That could help out. just once again make your trees feel a little more lively, less static, less like, lines like here's the tree. Give them some life, give them some personality. About the castle itself, I'm not sure what this thing over here is. There's like a weird protrusion coming out that way, which it strikes my eye in like my design sense as something strange, but maybe you have an idea for it. But once again, this feels like rough, like something you would continue defining. Although the characters here, they feel pretty defined. Like they feel like they're ready to go. They're ready to be in a final piece. But yeah, you could even bring in a little more subtle, kind of cloudiness and atmosphere to break up, chunks of the castle and give it some, mysterious depth and things like that. So let's move on, see what else we got. We got another black and white environment. I hope these aren't by all like similar people, or some of these aren't by the same person, but they might be because I didn't do a good job of keeping track of who did what. So I look at the thumbnail for this one, and it looks pretty good. This looks watery, and there's like a pier with some little boats floating around. So anytime I open one of these, I'm always looking at the thumbnail, and I can't show it to you on the video because it's off in the right-hand corner in Photoshop. But it's basically the little thumbnail of what the piece looks like in the little navigator screen. And that's always where I'm looking. I'm not looking over here at everything that's going on. I'm looking off to the corner to get an idea for the composition. So let's see. It looks pretty good. Obviously, you could bring in a bit more, shadow so they feel like a bit more wavy or something. I don't know. I'm sure there's something you could do, and a bit more gradients maybe going on, so there's a bit more action in the water maybe. A bit more. There's like, it's a very foggy feeling piece, and there's a bit of confusion with the piers as to where it's going. I feel like it could be sorted out a bit more. It feels like it's coming down really low over here, lower than it should, and then going back up over there. But yeah, it's good. It has potential. You just kind of got to keep working on it farther and farther, because this seems like something that you've started on, but obviously these kind of things just get fixed up as you go along. Here's a piece of art that looks pretty good. We got a character design. The metal and everything like that, I like the rendering on it. It has a nice texture, and the lighting feels genuine. Like you can see how there's a soft lighting. There our main lighting source on the side, and things get darker as they turn toward the shadow side, but then there's that strong secondary lighting just kind of giving the accent and popping everything forward. And that's a very kind of strong and basic lighting scheme that you want to kind of use in a lot of your concept art, where there's one main lighting source and then one secondary lighting source just kind of popping things out. But anyway, let's see, what can we critique here? There's a couple things that jump out at me in terms of this armor, especially on the legs. It feels like you made the silhouette first, because the silhouette's kind of the same on both legs. But that's despite the fact that one leg is actually turned toward us and the other is turned toward that side. So this one feels like it should be the proper kind of design for the armor, where this thing is sticking up kind of more in the front. But this one's actually different, where it doesn't have the thing sticking up in the front, but it's on the side. So just stuff like that would probably confuse your 3D modeler or something. They'd be like, I don't even know how to make this. Doesn't make sense to me, so I don't know what I'm doing. So a couple other things. Mainly, I don't know, I have some issues with the face in that it feels like it's trying to be very cartoony and kind of Team Fortressy in terms of proportions, yet the rendering style, it feels like it's trying to be more realistic. So there's kind of this balance where you have to either commit to one way or the other, or else it just kind of looks, off in both ways. But I like this kind of lighting around his head. You did a good job kind of rendering stuff and bringing in this lighting where there's the yellow lights. I might have less redness on the face just so it's not standing out as much. There's like certain times where you're just going to kind of not have the face be too much contrastian and drawing too much attention. So like his face is very shiny too. Like you can see there's this white specular kind of highlight all along this side, and that's okay. He could be sweaty, and you could get that highlight. But it feels like it's not needed, or that it's not helping the design much. That highlight over there. I don't know, just kind of nitpicky stuff. I'm trying to help out because you obviously have a good idea of what you're doing, and it's just kind of a matter of trying to figure out how you can get even slightly better and be better than all of us. So this area, it may be a little too black. I would have pushed this down to a slightly more grayer tone or something, just so it doesn't feel like black outline. But maybe this is a hint. Maybe this is a hint that this whole thing was a black silhouette, and that would explain, certain aspects of it. But anyway, nice piece overall. Thank you for sharing that. And next up, we have this piece by Alfie Alpha. And let's see, jumping right off the bat, it's mainly an issue of showing distance and using your environmental settings. So I would assume that this is underwater, right? Doesn't this seem like it should be underwater? The girl and her teddy bear falling into the water. The problem is that the lightness and values and kind of all the factors that go into rendering this bear are pretty much the same as this girl here. So they both have pretty much the same value range, the same saturation range, and so that makes them look like they're on the same level. But obviously, unless she has a giant teddy bear that's awkwardly falling in like the same way, I would assume the teddy bear is supposed to be close to camera and she is supposed to be farther away. But in any case, you'd probably just push her back, way back, with using your bluer tones. You don't obviously want to have skin tones that are this orange and light and warm. You want to kind of bring them down. And, the only way to really practice that is to look at some photos of people in water. And there's a ton of those on the internet. You can find, people swimming, underwater photography, and practice that because you get all kinds of weird stuff with underwater photography. You get those, like, weird lighting effects where it's really like wavy and ripply and all that kind of strange stuff. But the main thing is just to push this way back into the atmosphere. And when we say atmosphere, it doesn't always mean the air. It can mean, when we refer to atmosphere, obviously, when scientists refer to it, it means air. But when we refer to it in art, the atmosphere is just the surroundings. So since this is underwater, we just want to push it back into the distance, and we use that just by making everything darker and bluer and less, standing out. And that way we can make this look in front and this look in back. And even this one would probably be a lot bluer, and it wouldn't have these highlights, around the edge, because that's just not how the sun gets through the water. The sun kind of gets distorted and reflected and refracted, and, things are just more interesting. But anyway, let's move on. Let's see what else we got. So we got a robot here by Piet Cold, and it's kind of a cute little design. The main thing I would mention probably is, just typical weight and balance stuff that is, I don't know, so key to industrial design. You want everything to feel like it's weighted and balanced properly. Let me get a different color. So you can see how the legs kind of feel a bit off. This one, the front part feels like really long, and this one feels kind of short. And generally, just how on how the legs are distributed, you want them to feel like they're sturdy, like they're under the weight, like they support it. So you kind of really have to mess with your legs, and you usually do that in the thumbnail stage because it's hard to do once you're really rendering things. But when you're in the thumbnail stage, that's when you really kind of pop your legs and be like, okay, I'm gonna have a leg here and a leg here, and they're gonna be balancing this whole giant weight up here or whatever. Okay, but I like the color use, especially in this cockpit area, of these shadow tones. You can see they're kind of like green and stuff instead of just being darker yellow, bringing in lower value colors. You actually brought in different hues and tones, and that kind of gives it a more lively feel. So let's see, what else can we find? Dinosaur, formerly Lovely BR. How do you like my new name? I guess it's okay, Dinosaur. I had no problem with your old name. whichever makes you happy. So this one looks like a good chance to point out some anatomy stuff, and overall, like, I like the hand stuff. Like, the anatomy looks pretty solid on certain parts. This part over here, God, my voice is correct, I think. This part over here looks a bit strange in that it feels like the muscle is kind of wrapping around from the top of the arm to the bottom, and obviously there's no muscles that do that. You just kind of want to keep your arms, kind of basic, where you have your biceps in the front and, some muscles and triceps in the back. But there needs to be like that slight separation, and you did do a good job of like twisting the muscles around like they are when you move your arm in certain directions, and the muscles just kind of get twisted in that direction. Versus if your arm was, say, palm up and facing the sky, I think that's the like neutral state, or the muscles are not twisted at all. But once again, we could go all into all of this when we really tackle anatomy stuff. But yeah, just this part over here, specifically around the elbow joint, was just felt off to me. And doing faces when they're facing straight up like this, it's a bit challenging. So the main thing I would watch for when doing that is kind of the lighting stuff. You might even bring the lighting down a bit more on the face, just so it doesn't feel like this part feels very narrow up here. The lighting, it's probably gonna fade out more over the edge. It's not a hard edge right here, so just kind of bring that down a bit more. See if you can mess with it, and stuff of that sort. But overall, I like your snake, I like your guy, I like the hands. The hands are probably the standout part. Look at those little veins and everything. So you could probably bring in some hue variation as well, maybe on the face, very subtly. I don't want to encourage you to do anything too weird. And just kind of mix things up like that. And if you wanted to make your snake seem more slimy, you can, even add more speculars and stuff just to really push the textures and whatnot. But that's all up to you. I don't want to encourage that either. So let's see. I think we'll wrap it up with this final piece by Raihin, and this just once again, it sums up some basic issues with shading and how we do it, but it actually works out. So it looks like, if I would guess, he's using like dark, values. It looks very like dodge and burny, if you know those terms from Photoshop, using like the dodge and burn tool, where shadows kind of look like burnt out, and the highlights kind of look like light white versions of the values, kind of over hold on, I could get this word, overvalued maybe, just over lightened and kind of pale, where you want to do like colored stuff. But it works in terms of like doing like a Sackboy stuff, because that kind of gets that burlappy feel, and it kind of works out a little bit in your favor. So let's see, but it doesn't work out over here on, say, this staff thing, which really just could have benefited from like a real direct kind of lighting source, with like highlights on one side and then clear cut shadows, because probably a more direct light source coming down on it. So you keep the shadows simple, keep your light source simple, focus on those blocky values. And I don't know why these feather looking things seem a bit strange or a bit too light. So it kind of looks like you started with a black silhouette, because I see all these like black and white brush strokes going on back here, like in the hair area. And normally, at least in my experience, like if I want to like clean this up, afterward, like I'll start my black and white, I'll do my brush strokes. But certain times you could just mask them with your color. But with things like this, where it feels like you want the hair to be fading out, into the background, you want it just to be light brush strokes. You don't want all this black, which feels out of place. You just want the yellow, hair, or whatever color you want this strands of stuff to be. I would just, when I would do that, I'd just, get rid of all that stuff and then go back in and, do my stuff over it with the fading of light to dark, and keeping it like that. Oh man, I hate the way I talk sometimes. I don't make any sense. But anyway, let's just wrap this up right now before I ramble about nonsense. It sounds like that crow has finally gone to sleep, and maybe I should go to sleep as well. So I want to thank everyone for submitting art, and I'm sorry I don't get a chance to critique everything, but hopefully that Facebook group can become like a central hub and we could critique each other's art on there and talk about our art and share it. And we probably won't use that for any more design labs. We'll put design labs somewhere else entirely, and the Facebook group will be entirely dedicated to sharing artwork, either related to videos or just related to critiques. So, thanks for watching. I hope this was at least somewhat entertaining. And we'll probably do some of these on live stream. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and get in on that if you want some portfolio reviews going on. All right, that's all.